In this podcast episode, Nick Shirley delves deeply into a massive fraud scandal centered on Minnesota's daycare system and related welfare programs. The discussion covers how the fraud came to light, the involvement of political figures and specific communities, the challenges Nick has faced amid intense public scrutiny and backlash, and the broader implications for government oversight and media coverage. The episode also touches on Nick's journalism approach, the role of social media platforms like X, and potential solutions for preventing similar fraud in the future. Nick Shirley explains how he uncovered what could be the largest fraud scandal in U.S. history involving daycare centers and related welfare services in Minnesota. The fraud centers on businesses receiving millions in federal and state funds without providing the services they claim to offer. Nick's investigative approach was novel in that he physically visited multiple daycare centers, observed the lack of children, and questioned staff who often could not provide basic enrollment information or brochures. This visible and undeniable evidence is what propelled the story to virality. Nick connected with a local advocate named David, who had been gathering inside information on the alleged fraud for years. David has been closely observing the situation, noting that despite numerous violations and the operation of multiple businesses from single locations, little action was taken. His long-term surveillance and knowledge bolstered Nick's investigation by confirming that children were rarely seen at the facilities in question. The fraud primarily involves Somali-run daycare and home health care businesses, with about 89% of the implicated population being Somali immigrants. The scam exploits welfare programs designed to support vulnerable populations, funneling large sums of money through government grants without delivering appropriate care. Nick contrasts the visible scale of this fraud with other less tangible fraud issues, emphasizing the easy-to-see nature of this scandal. State officials, including Governor Tim Walz, have been criticized for enabling, or at least failing to stop, the fraud despite claiming efforts since 2019. Nick argues that political cowardice and a desire to secure votes from immigrant communities contribute to the ongoing problem. Specific politicians, such as Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, are mentioned in relation to unexplained surges in wealth, suggesting potential financial ties to the fraud. Nick explains how state and federal funds are dispersed to daycare centers under welfare programs, with little effective auditing or enforcement. Many centers with multiple violations still receive funding. The fraudulent operations extend beyond daycare centers to include home health care, adult daycare, assisted living, and non-emergency transportation companies. The transportation aspect is used to fabricate proof of services supposedly rendered, often with empty vehicles on the road. When Nick and his team physically visited these centers, they often faced locked doors, blacked-out windows, and unresponsive staff. Attempts to engage with providers were met with hostility, sometimes police intervention, and accusations of racism or political bias. Despite these hurdles, Nick states he has not received any credible refutation from those defending the centers, with no one providing evidence of legitimate child care enrollments, as he requested. Mainstream media outlets have often framed Nick as a right-wing or conservative influencer, attempting to discredit his findings rather than investigate the fraud itself. This political polarization has led to personal attacks and doxing, forcing Nick to hire security and take personal safety precautions. The episode highlights the growing divide between independent investigative journalism and establishment media narratives. Nick's video documenting the fraud exploded online, garnering over 130 million views on X and 500 million impressions across platforms in a short period. High-profile attention from figures like Elon Musk, who publicly supported Nick's work, and others within government and law enforcement, has amplified awareness. Still, the exposure comes with the cost of increased personal risk and constant scrutiny. The discussion broadens to include comparisons with other massive fraud cases, such as pandemic unemployment fraud and mismanaged projects like California's high-speed rail. Nick suggests that such fraud is not isolated to Minnesota, but is a widespread problem across many states, often tied to lax oversight and political incentives. He also ties fraudulent NGO and nonprofit operations to political campaign financing. Nick advocates for immediate pausing of all funding to these fraudulent daycare centers until verification and surprise inspections can confirm legitimate operations. He supports freezing payments and insists on transparency and accountability with tangible audits. Additionally, Nick plans to build a decentralized network or platform allowing the public to anonymously report and monitor instances of fraud, enhancing grassroots oversight. The podcast reveals the toll the investigation has taken on Nick's personal life, including threats, harassment, and physical dangers when filming on location. He describes incidents where security had to intervene to prevent attacks and details the precautions he must now take, such as wearing bulletproof vests and avoiding public transportation. Despite this, he remains committed to exposing corruption. Nick addresses videos and claims made by people defending the daycare centers, including one that argued children are present after school hours or during specific times. However, Nick refutes these claims with documentary evidence, pointing out that some centers were shut down shortly after his videos aired. He stresses the importance of transparency, questioning why centers fear public scrutiny or refuse to provide enrollment materials. The role of social media platforms like X, formerly Twitter, is discussed as a democratizing force in modern journalism. Unlike traditional media, which often filters and limits content, platforms like X allow rapid and massive organic reach. Nick credits this with enabling his video to break through lengthy editorial processes and reach influential audiences, including policymakers and billionaires. The episode explores why fraud becomes politically charged, noting accusations of racism and Islamophobia used as shields against addressing issues within immigrant communities. Nick highlights how political decisions sometimes prioritize electoral gain over fraud prevention, contributing to continued abuse. The complex relationship between minority communities, political representatives, and governance is examined. Nick shares insights into his content creation process, emphasizing authenticity and immersive storytelling. He prefers filming with smaller, less obtrusive equipment to give viewers a first-person experience. He critiques traditional journalism for bureaucratic delays and lack of reach, positioning independent creators as more agile truth-tellers capable of effecting change quickly. Looking ahead, Nick considers expanding his investigative work beyond Minnesota to unveil similar frauds elsewhere, particularly in California and New York. He contemplates building a supportive community or movement to empower citizens to hold governments accountable. Despite the risks and pressures, he expresses fulfillment in knowing his journalism has sparked real governmental investigations and public discourse.